Can we reimagine the systems we live in? How can economics reflect our common humanity? And can we change it in time?
Time with Steve and friends. We're back for season 3. It's going to be a special show. We've got Applied MMT in the house, going to be talking about their new national model. Be kind, stay safe, and enjoy the show.
Welcome back. There you are. Here I am. It does feel like a lifetime since the last show, doesn't it? I trust you've all liked and shared the show on your favorite platform. If you're here on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you know when we're live. Next time, have you ever wondered why traditional investment strategies sometimes fall short, especially during economic shifts? Today, we're exploring the business of Applied MMT and how it's offering a fresh perspective on market research and investment. And it matters because no one else that I know of is confidently and successfully using MMT as an investment tool. Now, I'm not personally some big trader, and I expect most of you guys aren't either, but you don't need to know too much to know the implications of investors starting to use MMT as their guide. So Douglas has been on the show before, back in March, and he's back for more. But there's a new and very exciting twist to this story that I'll come to in a moment. Let's just say you'll be very pleased to know someone else is back on the show, and this time for good. For those of you that have been living under a rock in the economics world, MMT is an economic framework that rethinks how we view government spending, taxation, and monetary policy. It highlights that sovereign governments with their own currencies aren't financially constrained like households or businesses. They can create more money to fund spending. Now, on this show, although you'll know we're more than sympathetic to MMT, we don't aim to just parrot MMT talking points. We like to explore it without fear or favor. So why is Applied MMT revolutionary for investing, and perhaps what can it tell us about MMT? Traditional investing models often misunderstand the impact of government fiscal policies on the economy and markets. They may view government deficits as negative, predicting higher interest rates or inflation. However, MMT suggests that government spending can actually boost economic growth without necessarily causing inflation, especially when there's unused economic capacity. So far, so obvious for you regulars, but you never know who's lurking. I like to keep people involved. In essence, Douglas and the team at Applied MMT have now got the receipts for successfully predicting the market upturn of 2023. And I remember watching his predictions in late 22 and early 23, getting mauled by lamestream economists and thinking, how's he doing this? Now, I didn't know that there was this whole neural net thing going on where the team have got a machine learning process to interpret private debt levels, bank credit data, and government spending, among other things, using an MMT lens to smoosh it all together into a big, here's my market prediction sandwich, right? Now, add into the mix, this process simultaneously gave MMT a new real-world success story, and you can see why we just had to have him back on. At the same time, Douglas and our Ty have been secretly beavering away on a new offering called MESSSI, Macroeconomic System State Simulator. Love a good acronym. So Ty is back on the show, not just lurking in the background. The model uses the MMT Ravel software package recently launched by Steve and his business partner, Russell, and Douglas and Ty are going to give us the lowdown on what it'll be able to do. So we've quite a show for you. We've got Applied MMT, Ty is back, Steve's been speaking at the European MMT conference at the end of August, as well as finding the time to have lunch and a few beers with me in London. I do want to know what Mike has been up to over the summer, but I think we're going to have Ty on first to explain his Michael Jordan routine coming out of retirement. Come on down, Ty Keane.
Woo!
There he is.
Wow.
Do you like that?
The cheers. That's me. Michael Jordan. Right. That's right. I did start a career as a baseball player for 6 months, and I failed miserably. So I'm back to doing stuff that I'm good at, which is math. And I decided, you know what?
Michael Jordan didn't go away and do that. That's true, but he did come back out of retirement, and I think smashed it again for another season or two. So that's what I'm kind of expecting big things out of you now. There's no pressure though.
The pressure's on, but I'm back. I came back in August, so I'm excited to get in the game of economics again.
But you've not been doing nothing. You were building this system with Douglas. Maybe we're going to save some of that fire because Douglas is on a sec. But I guess that's been something you've been doing for the last couple of years. I didn't know about that, so I'm just wanted to just get a bit of a skinny on that. You've been working on that quietly, and it's become a bigger idea. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so I guess it's good to tell the origin story. So initially, I kind of broke into system dynamic modeling with a pandemic model about 3 years ago. That's how I met Steve. Fuck a duck, as his first word was to me, or first 3 words.
So strange.
Via email. So I didn't know if he hated me or really loved my model. It wasn't quite clear immediately, but it turned out he liked my model. So with his encouragement, I took that process, that first project of mine, and I took it to the International System Dynamic Conference in 2022. It kind of went through that whole process, and it came to an end. That was that. The pandemic was over. There was no use for the model, and hopefully we don't need it anytime soon, although it is highly predictive. So I needed a new project, and one of the big things hooking up with Steve is I wanted to extend his legacy. He's got a body of work, a lifetime of work. And being a heterodox economist, you're essentially put to the sidelines, your legacy. And people do come up and try to take your work and move it forward, but there's definitely resistance to it when you're on that side of the fence in economics. And I just saw a huge wealth of potential in all the little things he had done, especially with modeling, right? Which it created that intrigue for me. It allowed me, when he created the Minsky software, not only could I watch one of his lectures per se, I could actually go test out his theories, right? And put it together myself and then say, oh, is that really true if I do a parameter change, et cetera, et cetera. So I went really deep with, all his teachings. And I have to say, through this process of building this model, I think it just was some more exponential growth on my knowledge with system dynamics, my knowledge with economics, which mostly involved just throwing out all the trash that I hear about, what economics is. So I can boil it down. This model is basically Mark Lavoie, Wynne Godley, Steve Keen's a doctoral paper he did in 97. I'll give a little bit of credit to Warren Mosler, although I kind of give that more to Godley. But it's a combination of all that. And the one thing I really wanted to focus on is I wanted to meld, a theory of production and lay MMT over that theory of production. So there's an engine in the private sector underneath all those fancy accounting identities
So
that are actually
it's this massive
driving.
historical economic fruit salad in here. Is this what it is?
I wouldn't say not massive per se, just I think the true classics, you could say. And Steve will name those true classics off the same way I will. Minsky, Godley, Phillips. Phillips kind of has been relegated to the fake Phillips curve, and there was so much more to him as an engineer and modeling in the same way that Steve and I models and Mike models. Just shout out Phillips, even though he's long gone. He beat Jay Forrester really in his national economic model. That was the water and the pipes. I forget, Moniac, I think is the abbreviation. Where he beat out
built that model.
Jay. Yeah, and so although it was analog and not digital.
Yeah. It was still a very good attempt, and it metaphorically helped a lot of people, didn't it? But keep your powder dry. Let's get on the king of ham radio, the man voted to be the nicest guy in economics. It's a low bar. Mike Radzicki.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, man. How's it going?
It's going well.
I didn't fade out that sound effect very well. But yeah, how was your summer?
See everyone.
And what about having Ty back? Is this good or what? It's like putting the band back together.
Oh, hell yeah. We were,
he
was always lurking behind the scenes, sending out little messages. Now we get to see him.
Yeah, exactly.
Now
he's never quite left.
Hear the little messages. Yeah.
This is true.
So I'm going to be all ears on today's presentation, because I'm not sure you guys know this about me, but in the late 1980s, I started consulting at the Chicago Board of Trade in the 30-year Treasury futures pit. And first day I was there, they said, get in that pit and don't make a trade. Just figure out what's going on. And we were building in the late 80s and early 90s automated trading systems. We just couldn't make money when we had to pay the enormous fees back then. It ate up all the profits. But then the internet was invented. And for over 20 years at WPI, I ran with another professor a automated trading system project center. And we put a lot of kids into the big trading firms. So I've got quite a lot of experience on trading systems. So I'm all ears and all eyes today to see what these guys have cooked up.
Very good. Well, let's while we're having a reunion, let's get Steve on if he's there. We were not sure if we could get in touch with Steve. He might be indisposed or not. We have got Steve.
Hi guys. Yep. Hi. Yep.
Yep. Hey. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, I think I've, you know how much I try to avoid getting COVID. I went to a restaurant on Tuesday night in London with my Carbon Tracker crowd, and you can tell there's a bit of a frog on my voice. I'm hoping it's not COVID, but I clearly picked up something at that restaurant. So I bombed out. That's why I've just arrived late. I've come back from my third sleep for the day, which has me worried. Anyway, so
yeah,
let's hope I survive.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, that's why
I'll be a bit
of a lagging. Sorry?
So you need a shot of whiskey. You need a shot of whiskey. It'll kill all the germs.
I can get stronger stuff over here, thank Christ. That's what I'm using instead, but I'll try not to smoke anything while we talk, okay?
Yeah, it's a Steve and Friends show. You can smoke away if you need to.
Well, it is legal in Amsterdam, but anyway, I'll avoid nonetheless.
Okay.
Steve, we've got
if you want
back.
To see where somebody, if you want, sorry, if you want to see where somebody says, "Looks like I picked the wrong day to stop sniffing glue," I'm your man. Okay. You guys don't know who doesn't know the reference?
What?
Flying High, the airplane movie. Yeah. Okay. Lloyd Bridges. Yeah. Look it up.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you're in safe company there. There's a whole lot of baby boomers and Gen Xers that cross over on the airplane movies. I think
we're old enough to know the jokes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
the comedy airplane movies from the 80s?
Comedy airplane movies. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've watched them, but I can't remember.
I'll send you the scene later. I'll send you the
Striker,
scene later.
Striker.
Yeah.
Anyway, they got quoted a lot at school. I remember that as well. So, Steve, we got Ty back, although he never really left, as far as we think. But he's back on screen, I think. So, for people that don't know, I guess Ty's been in the background for us a lot, but it is good to see him back chatting with us live as well.
Yeah. It's rather hard having a god in the background, or I prefer my gods to be in the foreground.
Wow.
Let's not talk about too much.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know how to follow that up.
Yeah, I don't know either. We'll edit that out. Oh no, it's live.
I believe in the Greek gods. Okay, so Zeus and all those arseholes who enjoy tormenting humans. So that's my real set of gods. I want to see where the bastards are, so I can avoid the next thunderbolt.
I just torment Austrian economists now, so I not just general humans, just the Austrians.
Yeah.
Steve, you were at
so you got me on?
You were at an MMT conference at the end of August. We'll bring on Douglas in a sec, but I just heard about that recently. Just wanted to see if you had any update or something insightful about the conference that was worth talking about.
Oh, it was a good little conference, very small. I mean, this is basically there are nice and there are not so nice people in MMT. I don't think it's surprising to say that to anybody. Dirk Ernst is one of the very nice people, and after some of the not so nice people decided to disinvite me from the Leeds conference, I'm not going to let that one get away. To compensate, Dirk invited me to the one in Berlin. So it was a small workshop, about 40 or 50 people. And I gave the paper I would have given in Leeds had I not been disinvited. And that was a paper showing you can mathematically prove the monetary propositions of MMT. So I was going there with a birthday present and I was refused at the door. So, we'll talk about that some other time, but not happy is one way that I can express my feelings about that. And thinking, basically, let other people shoot your feet off, at least you can try to get out of the way. When you fire the bullets at your own feet, you tend to be more accurate. So, don't throw away people who are trying to assist you. Anyway,
100%.
But Dirk knows that, so I had a good bunch of people there, and it was moderately useful for them. I would have preferred to have presence at the lead conference and give a workshop or two on how to use Ravel to make the points of MMT. But that didn't happen.
I had tickets to go, but obviously hosting this show and turning up there when you'd been disinvited just didn't seem right. So I didn't go, but for good reason. I mean, but it is good to see you back in the fold somewhat by going to a conference and staying in because it would be a shame if it ended up being just a whole lot of petty personality squabbles. Not your fault. It's too important for that. This stuff is just too important.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's too important. Personalities hobble it, and that's why I've continued. I'll go to the next MMT conference, but if they accept my paper and they turn me down, I'm turning up anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll give a presentation somewhere. It's this crazy stuff. This sort of personality shit dominates economics in general because really it's not a science. And therefore, it's even worse than you get in actual sciences where big egos get in the way. Big egos don't tell Einstein that we're not going to look at your paper because you're a patent clerk.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. We've got a whole new system of looking at the world, but let's just squabble about who said what when. It's just pathetic. So don't want to do any more of that. Let's bring on our guest for today, Douglas from Applied MMT. Come on in and welcome to Steve Keen and Friends again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for hopefully I'm one of the nice MMTers.
You are definitely.
After that introduction out of the gate, Dave, man, that was quite the introduction. I had to make sure and get on every social and like and subscribe, which of course all the people watching this should be doing too right now. So glad to be back. Thanks for having me on.
You've got some exciting news for us because now it's not we are going to talk about Applied MMT, of course, but I want you and Ty to, and I don't mind who goes on this, but I want the lowdown on what's going on with Messi because that seems like a very well kept secret, at least to me.
Ty, I'll let you take it.
Actually, I want Doug to just give a basic rundown of Applied MMT, its totality, before we get into the Messi model, just so everybody who doesn't know what applied MMT is knows what it is after you say what it is.
Right on. So, about 10 years ago now, like many people, you get very intrigued by markets, understanding how markets work, understanding how economics works. And I was a very big Austrian at the time. Really thought they had the right explanation for how things played out in the business cycle. And part of my instinct was, okay, if this is really how things play out, there should be some empirical data to really support this. And I was really didn't have a full understanding of system dynamics, but that style of approach, like it had to be, that had to be how you can explain the business cycle, and that there had to be some sort of mechanism driving the business cycle. You should be able to figure this out over time. And fast forward a couple years, as I was kind of researching this, trying to do eventually what applied MMT would, it dawned on me that what the MMTers are saying with regard to government spending, with regard to kind of a balance sheet approach, is absolutely true. It is the foundation for understanding a monetary system. And then right at that same time, as I was kind of discovering this, a buddy of mine is like, "Hey, you got to check out this guy named Steve Keen. He's going to be right up your alley." And then that was just bam. It was absolutely eye-opening, and he gave me the understanding of, okay, there are dynamics that are at play. It is a combination of this whole government spending thing has a function, and then there's a business cycle of credit creation and destruction that is endogenous to the system. You put those two things together, you get a business cycle out of it. And now, having effectively built up that over the last 10 years, it's very clear that still to this day, we are in the absolute minority of people who understand this. And because of that, you can still really exploit markets. You can really still understand where markets are going when the rest of the, you guys know this is just general economists. The rest of economists don't have the slightest clue what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone what's going to happen a year or two from now, nor do they have even the slightest clue how to even build any sort of tools or systems to understand that. And because of this, it's the exact same thing in the finance world. They are still stuck in the Stone Age in terms of the tools they have available to them to actually understand this approach. And so it's still a very exploitable approach. So that is where Applied MMT is today. And we're a research and analysis company. Applied MMT is, and that research and analysis has quickly evolved into some very sophisticated tool building endeavors that I'll hand it back over to Ty now to kind of tell you about in terms of how we got started on this. But because of the work that people like Steve Keen have done on Minsky, now Ravel, and because of the approach. Just because of that whole approach and the work that they put in, we've been able to accelerate that entire concept idea further to get Ty's baby, Ty's life work into what will very soon be a web app that everyone can have control over and play with, and start to make some really run some very sophisticated simulations and make some really sophisticated insights that we're going to show off today, too. We've got it ready to run, and it'll certainly, speaking about making people upset, the proof is in the pudding, and we will certainly make some people upset based on what they think might be the best policy prescription. So in classic clickbait, hold retention, we're going to have some absolutely shocking results that we've stumbled across that will be hopefully fun to discuss.
So, Ty, before you respond, do you want to do top chatter since you're back? That seems like a fitting way to restart your appearances on Steve Keen and Friends.
Damn, I usually pass that off to other people so I don't look bad. Geez. Okay. Okay, so we've got the Skype conserver, Bob Lior, Rick O'Brien, Michael D'Souza Cruz, Hugh N, Drigeye, Web Freaks, Rob Pierce, Gavin Van, Economics in One Lesson, Tony Wilson, Amar Benhal, Hashimi, we'll go with that, Bob Dons, Shot, Herb Wiseman, Cybernetics, Political Economy 101. God, you trolled me so many times on social media. I want to do things that are Not speakable. Danny TR Owen.
We still love you. Keep going.
Oval, Newman, Joe Polito, Alex Marshall, Manorano Ran. Oops, sorry, I butchered that. Jovianar, Nicholas Gomez, Danger Zone. Danger Zone is here. I've been seeing a lot of Danger Zone. Thanks for being on the show today. Algo Rhythm, Thomas Darlington, Ken Crawford, Butched Mandela, Derek McDaniel, Lamar, Marcus Champ. The champ is here. Brian Boyd, Igor Insaniac. I wanted to say Insomniac, but that's clearly Insaniac. George Waters, Orlando, Jim Roberts, P. Craig, William Thompson, Bill Goggin, Louisiana, blah, blah, Carlitos, MMT, Amar S, Tickety Boo. I'm done. I got through it.
You made it. Tony Wilson, I see, is there as well. Tony, good to see you in the chatters. Recent guest.
Tony.
So Ty. Yeah. So, Ty, give us your angle on what Doug was saying there, and just where Ravel fits in this as well. Would be good to know, I think.
Yeah, so it's all like the national model, like I was kind of saying earlier, it started development about 2 years ago, and I was exclusively modeling it on the Ravel Minsky software. It's now called Ravel now, but you can still use the slang term and say Minsky if you're an old-fashioned Minsky user. So I still have to give it credit, even though Doug's been teaching me some basic Python skills. I don't think I'm at the level to build a model from scratch right in Python. So the interface itself was really helpful with the godly tables, making sure your stock flow accounting consistent. Notice how I add accounting. I think stock flow consistent is not good enough when you were talking about economics. It should be stock flow and accounting consistent. So, I use that software program. I got to the end of the project essentially in the early winter this year. And my initial thought was, okay, I can write a book about this. This is a book level model. And I struggled, and I've written many drafts. All of them are pretty poor at this point. It's clear that I'm better at math than writing. So I kind of juggled back and forth. Okay, is this going to be, a very mathy book, or is it just going to be a narrative about my model? And I also have always been very intrigued with a simulation that came out quite a few years ago called En-ROADS. And it's an online web simulator that you can go in, flight simulate it. And I thought, geez, if I had the chops, I'd love to put that model, my model, online and have it a fancy interface like En-ROADS. And that in itself would be better than a book because people can just go try out the model. So there was that in the back of my mind. During the summer, Doug reached out to me for some assistance on kind of integrating some system dynamics into the whole AI framework that he's got going on there. And I said, sure, I love system dynamics, Doug. And he's like, you know what? There might be a little bit of in there for you. I'm like, sure, Doug, I like right. I like that. Right. So I'm all in. And we started kind of just evolving an idea. We had built a small separate model for Applied MMT. And as we were going through it, I'm like, Doug, we've got this model already. I built it. I did have plans for other things with it, but, I'd be willing to kind of turn it over to Applied MMT if we took it in a couple different directions. One of those directions is what we're calling Deep MESSI, which will be an actual forecastable version. And that's kind of early development right now. And then a qualitative one that we can actually put online. One of the conditions I told Doug is I want a free version for people. So obviously Applied MMT is a subscription retail based kind of operation. So we'll have one for the retail customers that'll be a little more advanced, but we'll still have, a free one that anybody can go try. So that's kind of the genesis of it all, and it's constantly evolving. I think Doug will has often said this a lot. We're like cooks in the kitchen when we get together. We're just cooking, right? And sometimes we don't know. We know the ingredients, but when we start mixing it together, we're like, holy shit. We've got
like another episode of Breaking Bad. That kind of cooking.
Yeah.
Economics.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve, can I get you in on this just to give us? You're seeing Ravel out in the wilds now suddenly, and these guys are using it. I mean, Minsky's been around for a while, but this is now updated and used better. What are your thoughts in seeing this, and how much? I don't know how much you know about it.
Well, I don't. It's you'll see when Ty whacks it up on the screen. It's an incredibly sophisticated and complex model. So I understand the building blocks because most of them are based on my research. What Ty's done is take them and combine them in a way that I haven't done and possibly couldn't do. I'm getting a bit too old for this sort of stuff these days. So I'm absolutely delighted to see the work being done. And as both Doug and Ty have said, the proof is in the pudding. If you can actually make money out of this stuff, then you can basically tell the neoclassicals to STFU whether they complain about you or not. Okay. And that was, if you look back at the success of Warren Buffett, that was he was told, you can't make money out of the markets because it's efficient. And he said, well, if that's true, I'll go bust. Last time I noticed, he wasn't bust. So that's a very tempting thought.
Well, I think it's time to take it away, isn't it, Doug? Douglas, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I will click share screen here, and we can go ahead and get the model running. We can walk through. So I think the plan today is to run, it should be sharing. I don't know if you guys can get the thing up on screen. There we go. All right. The plan today is to run a handful of, we have two kind of paths that we want to go down. The first is we want to resimulate the pandemic timeframe. And I think the main thing we want to show with the pandemic, just in terms of the implication of everything that took place and how to use something like a system dynamic simulation approach to see how all the various dynamics play out. We really want to see what happened to inflation, what government spending did to inflation, and then when the Federal Reserve ultimately raised interest rates in late 2022 into 2023, what was the effect of the interest rates actually being raised on inflation? Because of the way you can run system dynamics and because of ultimately what MESSI is and how we've developed this platform, it's very easy to see run after run after run to kind of get the gist of what's changing in between each run. And then the second thing is, and this is, I'll talk about Ravel for just a second. Steve, you had a video out about a month ago where you were discussing the implication of markups and the potential for a markup cap on inflation and what that would have done and how markups absolutely during the 2022 run-up of inflation were the primary driver for markups on profits, were the primary driver of inflation, what the implication would have been on that. And then one of the things that Ty and I discussed, and again we'll show this, and this is really the shocking fun stuff. It really is fun, the dynamics that were at play. And Ty and I last night, literally at midnight, we're playing around with this, looking at every single variable, and just every single time you put another variable on, it was thumbnail worthy, laughing, Cobra pose sort of stuff. The dynamics of what would happen if you were to if you were to put a markup cap on, really fascinating stuff. And it all just goes back to, you can't understand any of this and the implications of any of this unless you have a complete model of the entire macro economy, and if you are not properly explaining the dynamics at play, and that goes back to all the names that we list off prior, that if you don't have that theory embedded, you're not going to get the right dynamics. And I think what you'll see is absolutely what we built here will get you qualitatively the right dynamics at play. So I think how we're going to do this, Ty, he's going to kind of run me through step by step all the various kind of levers and everything and the theory behind why we're switching each lever. We're going to run through this. And then for everyone watching at home, again, we're going to get a working model free online, hopefully in the next couple weeks, maybe a month or so down the line. We're like Ty was saying, we're building two things in parallel, both a qualitative and a quantitative predictive model that uses kind of the deep MMT deep learning package built into that, and we're building those out in parallel. So what you're going to see is very much a beta version of what we have, and the various levers and settings and everything that's on. You're going to see us change. Make a lot of sense to us, but we're going to simplify that. So by the time the public has control over this, it's not quite as confusing. But we'll explain everything step by step. So Ty, why don't you kind of take it away, and I'll stay in the driver's seat.
Yeah, so we are looking at the qualitative type model. So we're looking for not exact numbers in these runs we're about to show, but the reference modes that we saw in the real world. And, we want that to match in our model. So, we're looking at the underlying behavior of the theory. So we're looking at, rates of change that look similar to the real economy. By no means when we run these shocks are we saying this is what happened in 2021. We're just kind of putting some different policies together to show the underlying dynamics during the event, and to some degree out into the future, keeping in mind that any model is kind of in a 3D cone, and the further you move out into the wide part of the cone, there's your air of uncertainty. So Doug, can you bring up the inflation rate variable? We got our inflation rate. And I'll just move the private chat out of my way. I'm on my little screen right now. So we want to implement the shock, Doug. So I designed a custom pandemic shock, and it involved quite a few different parameter changes to kind of get that going, to simulate, because I think in the free model, we're going to have little plug-in shocks. So if you're not an expert economist, you don't have to go to a specific parameter and change it without understanding what it is. You can kind of just use some of our free plug-in shocks and kind of see the dynamics for yourself, and then do the major policy change you want to do over top of it. So Doug, maybe between what did we say?
We said or mid 2022. So the thought was what we're going to do is we're going to try and get the policy shock on the upswing of inflation, and at the end of the prior business cycle, which is about where we thought we were at. So when we and also too, this whole thing just starts in 2020 and it runs till 2030. That's just kind of an arbitrary thing, just to kind of make it look sense to have years. So we're going to start 2022 pandemic shock. And Ty, go ahead and explain what the pandemic shock is actually doing in terms of the underlying conditions, and we're going to run it for 6 months.
Yeah, so the major, without getting too technical, the major kind of feedback loops here that are going to be affected is the capital utilization rate, which is just a given during the pandemic shock. It was a lockdown shock. We essentially reduced fixed capital utilization rate. We shut down factories and plants, and obviously that had an effect on domestic output, domestic employment, and that traveled through the economy. I also, because it was such an extreme situation that we had never done before, I also adjusted the feedback loop that dictates labor productivity in this model. As it's a variable, it's not a constant. It's a dynamic thing that occurs in the model. I adjusted that, and I think we got kind of the basic dynamics of what lockdown does to the economy. And if you can drag the right hand side of the screen and just eliminate those two other business cycles, and you can see right away, right there, that looks good. You can see right away we have our bump in inflation as expected. We've got, I'm wondering if I can remove us from there we go. Yeah. Beautiful. So you can see the what we'll call like a system dynamicist would say the reference mode of inflation. During the lockdowns, we did see a decline in inflation, almost to the point that where we were in deflation almost.
Actually, in this model, Ty, it does go to deflation. Actually, the right now it's on the right axis, so we are negative in inflation.
Oh, well,
right.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's a terrible experience for everybody.
Yep.
I have always advocated, actually a little higher inflation, like 5% wouldn't be bad. And I think Steve would agree with me that the arbitrary 2 number is arbitrary in itself, and 5 actually wouldn't be all that bad. But that's another story for another day. So you can see the basic reference mode of what we saw during the pandemic.
And Ty, I also just want to point out too that just so everyone knows, this thing is actually running across all variables. Just pulling up unemployment here real quick, just to show that also had the massive spike in unemployment that was part of the dynamics in the pandemic shock that caused the massive spike in unemployment. I don't know if you're going to point that out before we make the next move.
Douglas, can I interrupt just for 1 second? We had a question from Lana, and it was about markups and markup pricing. I don't know if you saw it, you wouldn't have seen that in the chat. Does that make sense? Can we?
Oh yeah, we'll
talk markup.
We'll get to that.
Okay,
we'll
sure.
get to that.
No worries. Sorry.
No worries. So this is we wanted to see as a basic reference mode. If we can go back to inflation there, Doug, we see the basic dynamics. Now, one thing to immediately point out is this is without any government intervention. So we didn't flood the economy. So direct household spending didn't go up during this run. We had no government spending into the general economy, yet we still had a spike in inflation. So this is one of the first things we really want to point out. What we saw, the inflation event that we saw, one, was endogenous to the system because of the shock that was introduced. And 2, it was a supply issue, not a money issue. And we're going to kind of demonstrate that in a second here, Doug. I think we want to do next is add mass amount of money to the households as direct government payments and bump up our payments to investment into firms.
Yep.
And we're going to simulate the policy response from government during the lockdowns, and we're going to see how that affects inflation.
So now we're going to introduce a handful of different parameter changes to allow us to kind of fly this thing like a flight simulator, like an airplane, that sort of thing over time. And next step is going to be first up, direct household spending. We're going to go ahead and enter the year that this is going to start. In Ty, I think we decided that government household spending would start in 2022, so right at the start of the pandemic, and that we would bump that up to 0.5. And then by 2023, and what this is going to do is this should allow us to simulate kind of the multiple kind of stimulus checks that came out. In 2023, we're going to bump this up to 0.10, and then we're just going to let it go ahead and level out for the remainder of the simulation. I'll clean up the chart in just a second. And then next up, we need just direct government spending to increase as well. And we'll go ahead.
Did we do this in the right order? Is this government?
Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You
got it. Good job, Doug.
All right, so next up, we're going to do government. Next up, we're going to do government spending. And we're going to go 2022, and we're going to go from 0.3 to 0.4. And then we'll go ahead and allow the engine to run. And if all goes well, we will have the updated policy levers changed and implemented through the dynamics of the system. And we'll go back now. So again, and Ty will elaborate on this in just a second. This is now with a crap ton of government spending, an insane amount of government spending. I think probably even more than what actually played out. So go ahead and take it away, Ty.
So I can't quite see on the screen, but it looks like we're approaching 9% inflation.
Now we're up to about 11% inflation. Yep.
11%. And with our initial run without the government intervention, what was our
Yep, I can actually bring that up. I have it on another screen, and just to show the pandemic shock is in the same area, what we can do is we can turn off unemployment again, and this is just the pandemic shock, as you can see by the red lines. Bring it to 2025, and during the prior time frame, we were at about 9.5%. Hopefully that can show up in the stream. We're about 9.5% inflation with the insane amount of government spending. We're at about 11, just over 11% inflation rate of change. So qualitatively, not a ton of difference.
Yeah, so this has always been my intuitive argument, since this event happened, is I always said, without modeling it myself, it was quite clear that this was mostly a supply issue, and that, the excessive money injected into the economy, which was necessary for people to pay their mortgages, probably had a very small effect on the rate of inflation. And if this model's assumptions are correct, which I think it is, because we performed quite a lot of back tests already, it's saying that the majority of the issue was a supply issue. And it kind of puts a lot of holes into the side of the argument that says this was purely a monetary phenomenon. If we want to bring out the ghost of Milton Friedman, I don't think that's the case. The model doesn't think that's the case. And intuitively, if you are literally shutting down economies, which we did in 2021, 2022, to an unprecedented level, of course you're going to have supply issues. Of course there's going to be inflation. It's quite self-evident. Doug, what do you want to add on to that?
All right. So now the next step is going to be really one of the big contentions we had, or that I had from like kind of the Applied MMT perspective, is that interest rates really are not going to do much if you're going to drop in. So in reality, what ends up playing out, right? We get this massive spike in inflation, and come, what was it, like early 2022, mid 2022, I think it was April 2022, the Fed is like, God, we got to raise interest rates. This inflation is getting out of control. Let's raise interest rates and see if that can actually, crush inflation. And already at this point, we have, the way this model is, the baseline model. And again, the lighter line here, we probably should have explained this at the outset. The lighter line is the stable run, right? As though nothing happened during that run. The dark line is us inducing the shocks and changing the various policy levers. And so as time played out, the Fed raises interest rates, and our conjecture was inflation is going to come down anyway, and raising interest rates really is at best ineffectual to inflation, and we see that again. This is all 0% interest rates. Inflation was always going to come back down because of just the way that the macroeconomy works. Now we're going to go ahead and put the higher interest rates in. We're going to go ahead and kind of show that when you do push interest rates higher, you're really not having that much of an effect on inflation. The thing's going to run out anyway, no matter how it is. And so we can go ahead and do that next step. I don't know if you had any other thoughts while I do that, Ty.
No, this is going to be just another interesting fact on, and this is actually, this will kind of make this fun. This is an area of contention between Doug and I. Is the
the implication of interest rates.
The implication of interest rates. Now, we agree, like most economists that disagree on things, it's really 5% of things, but they're really amplified. So this is Doug and I's major contention, is really what are the short-term implications of the policy rate? What are the long-term implications of the policy rate? Is the policy rate effective during all periods of the business cycle? Is it Steve, your mic is somebody's famous. So is the policy rate effective only during some parts of the credit cycle? So that's the debate me and him are having, and we're looking at the data, and ultimately we're going to come to a unified, conclusive answer to that. But these are some of the initial tests we are running. Doug, if you're ready.
Yeah, let's roll. I just want to show too on the right side as well, I've put the interbank rate or the policy rate on the screen so we can see that now when we do the next steps that we're going to do, which are bond purchases and bond sales, adjust those, that in fact we end up getting a higher policy rate as we head into the inflationary push, and just to show that right now we have a very low, essentially zero policy rate. So we need to increase the bond sales, correct? So we want to decrease the bond purchases and increase the bond sales to get less reserves in the system to force the interbank level higher, if that makes sense. And Ty, you can explain that thought while I go ahead and pull this off in the system.
Yeah, so in designing the model, I always stuck to something that Steve always taught me to do, and a lot of people call these simplifying assumptions, but they're more complicated than that. They're first principles. So if we look at the interbank market, we can say from a first principle perspective, there is some level of economic output, and the amount of settlement balances or reserves, as they're called in the United States, needs to adjust to that economic output in order for banks to transact with each other overnight in an efficient manner. And so that supply of settlement balances is affected by the demand of economic activity. You can then create a function on that relationship, and you get your interbank market rate in aggregate. And of course, all banks, when they're lending to each other, they're lending at different rates depending on the standing of each bank. But there is a generalized mean rate that we can define as the interbank rate. And so in this model, we have the interbank rate, and the user is setting the policy, targeting it. And the way they target it is by either injecting settlement balances into the banking system or removing them through asset purchases. And in this model, it's government bonds.
All right, so we're updating the simulation, and again, what I did is we introduced exactly the sort of changes. You know, we're effectively acting as the Fed, seeing inflation raise, and now we're going to adjust the policy rate. And I'm going to clean up the chart in just a second on the left side. But what I do want to show is the darker blue shading here as we head into say 2023, 2022, 2023 is now shooting the policy rate up to almost 5%, like we ended up seeing in reality. And then you can barely even see it. It's down there, but you can barely see it. During the prior run, it was the policy rate staying nice and low. So we have the dynamics that we ended up wanting. Now we can look at the impact of that on inflation. We'll go ahead and turn off unemployment here on our chart, zoom back into 2025. And what I did is I took a screenshot just a second ago to kind of show the before and after here of what the impact of higher interest rates was on inflation. And if you remember, we were right at about 11.15% inflation. And that's effectively where we still are right now, even given the higher interest rates that were being implemented on the market. And again, like I said, I took a screenshot, so now we're going to jump in between the two. We'll call 11.12 at the peak, and now we're at 11.12.5. And so we still end up getting the majority of the inflation. I think the only thing you can say is higher interest rates. So this is no higher interest rates, higher interest rates. No higher interest rates, higher interest rates. Maybe compresses the frequency, maybe gets us inflation down a little bit sooner, but absolutely minimal. And again, we're looking at that thick red line here. Very little qualitative change in terms of what interest rates actually ended up doing, given that they are the dominant feature of this was everything we were talking about. It's the supply side. It's the dynamics of shutting down the entire economy for 6 months. It was always going to play out this way, and interest rates had very little to do with the inflation coming down over the long run.
Can I get you to play devil's advocate on this? What would neoclassical or Austrians say looking at this graph? Because their argument. What would they say looking at it, and how would they try to defend their position when they see data like this? Because I think that's an obvious thing. That's what comes up. You put this sort of data out, and you see the arguments be like, yes, but going on all the time. What do you think? We lost Ty.
Well, and just like the devil, the argument is now dead. We killed the devil with this. There is no devil's advocate now.
I'm still here. Restream just seems to box me out when I've got this view. I was trying to keep the chart up and have you guys and your pretty faces appear on screen at the same time.
Well, I don't mind if you or Steve answer that, Ty, but I think it's worth just pointing out, because I feel like that's the thing that goes on with this data. You guys have done something remarkable, and then it just sort of gets like, it doesn't fit with their world model, so and their world view either. So
So ultimately, there's always going to be, and this is going to go, of course, to the marginalist school. So basically, you have your Austrian stream and then your neoclassical stream. But essentially, they're going to say this is, completely wrong without actually having a dynamic model to demonstrate how my assumptions are wrong. And remember, at the start of this little exercise, I pointed out that we're looking for the reference modes. Can we match the modes of behavior in the dynamic model with what we saw during COVID? And we can with our model. I haven't seen a neoclassical model that could. In fact, they all broke during COVID, just like they broke during 2008, because they're not set up to handle these dynamic shocks. They're just not designed to do that. So there's always going to be pushback from the other side, but Doug and I are continuing to develop more and more receipts. And, there is a structure to this model. Some of it's going to be proprietary and we can't talk about it, but there is an overall, structure to this model based on some solid foundations. And it's demonstrating, we'll show another one here in a bit. It's demonstrating when we introduce a shock, it is showing the exact same output that we saw in the real world. That in itself is kind of the first step. You remember George Box said, no model is right, but some are useful, right? And so we're seeing those useful reference modes. Okay, we've tried a shock here. We didn't design the model to be a COVID model, but we got the result. So we'll always get pushback in economics. Steve was going to say something.
Yeah, well, they will get confirmation of their model because their model says, and this is both the Austrians and the neoclassicals in different ways, they will say interest rates are the control variable for inflation. So if you put the interest rates up, you're going to reduce the inflation level. And lo and behold, they put the interest rate up and inflation fell. Therefore, we have confirmed our model. Okay. Now, they haven't done the scenario testing you guys do. They could try it. It'd be intriguing to see how they went. But to me, the real control variable, the real comparison control variable is Japan. Because when you take a look at what America and the UK and Australia and most of Europe did, they all put up rates and inflation fell. And Japan put up rates and inflation fell. They put them up from minus 0.25% to 0. And they had a better performance on inflation than any of the other countries. So the one bank doing totally inaccurate correlation, this is a classic case. I normally hate this phrase, correlation is not causation, because it's actually thrown at my causal models, by neoclassical when they don't like them. But when you see what they're doing here, they are using correlation. Yes, inflation went up. Yes, we put interest rates. Yes, inflation fell. Therefore, our model's verified. But you look and they actually did it on real economies. So it's not just a case of testing in a model, as you guys are doing, testing in a real economy. Now you look at the best performer in terms of the increase in inflation being less and the recovery being faster is Japan. Explain that one, guys, because that's minus 2.5, a negative interest rate to 0.25% higher to 0. So there is a real world example that they can't explain. As that was interesting to see if you guys have a go at it, because you'd still get the same sort of result. Your model would still say very little effect. So it is, again, they use correlation and they just don't test their models in the way that meteorologists do or genuine scientists do.
Mike, what are your thoughts? Because you're saying you've got a trading background there, or enough of one to be really interested in this. What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't see anything yet to show how this would be a trading system. I'm sure we're going to get there later today. My thoughts on how would a traditionally trained economist respond to this? I mean, I can speculate. A monetarist would say, put up a graph of M1 and or M2 against that inflation rate that you were showing, and let's see if they go together, right? That's inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So they say, oh, look at how they're correlated, as Steve was kind of alluding to. I think in modern times, this would be triggering this sort of modeling, system dynamics modeling, which is, of course, what I do. So this is, I'm trying to think of how the other side would react, so to speak, is they would point to VAR modeling vector autoregressive modeling, where you do the exact same things and say, well, we do this too in economics, and we're, it's empirically grounded and what have you. So I don't think the economics profession would simply surrender. I think they should back.
Yeah. Oh, but, we were wrong. We'll just stop talking
that's
about
kind of probably how they would approach, react to what they're seeing if I were to speculate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I
go ahead. Sorry.
I completely agree with Mike there, and it goes back to there are people's minds we're not going to change with this, but that's not the goal of what Doug and I are doing. We're actually going to use, now this kind of goes into how does this relate to the trading aspect is Applied M, and I'm going to let Doug kind of take this off my hands because he can say more about it, but Applied MMT essentially says you can rely on the macro economy for indicators on how you should invest in the broader financial markets. So that's kind of the tie-in with this model. This specific model is an educational tool for free users, just to explore how economics works. And then our retail subscribers are also going to get a more advanced version so they can understand how the macro economy behaves and then make the proper decisions with the other tools that Applied MMT provides. And maybe Doug might want to bring up some of those tools during the show just to demonstrate that we go far beyond just, a system dynamics model and whatnot. And Doug, maybe just kind of give a little more in-depth analysis of what the story is with Applied MMT. What's its mission statement relative to macroeconomics and the financial markets?
Yeah, are you guys still taking a break at the top of the hour? Or are we going 2 straight hours? Is that the plan?
We go 2 straight hours.
All right,
yeah.
All right.
Back on through.
All right, right on. Good. Yeah, maybe in a couple minutes we can bring up some of the other tools going forward. In terms of kind of how this is going to be used ultimately is for kind of an investment research purpose. We still have to, and again, this part's not ready yet, but there is going to be this embedding layer of using the deep learning technology that we've developed to allow us to have far more predictive insights, quantitative predictive insights into the future. Qualitatively, though, it is still from a macro perspective. I mean, especially if you're doing kind of positioning based on. So I'm just saying, like when you're doing portfolio positioning, understanding and finding. Are we going into inflationary environment into the future? Are we going into disinflationary environment into the future? Are we going into growth? Are we going into kind of stagnant growth? How long should we expect versus how short should we expect various business cycles to be? Are we seeing credit accelerate? Are we seeing credit decelerate? Even just understanding things like the causal chain. I mean, everyone except for a very, very small group of people heading into 2022, we're all saying recession, rates are going to kill the market, all that sort of stuff. Understanding the causal mechanisms and the causal chain of what drives the business cycle is so important. And I mean, again, our whole argument, I'm probably not going to get too many detractors here, in the heterodox MMT space, the vast majority of the world just has this wrong. They just have it absolutely backwards. And what this model allows you to do is validate various assumptions and play out scenarios that if you're very convinced that Trump's going to get elected, there's going to be massive tax cuts, what are those tax cuts going to do? Or you're very convinced that Harris is going to win and there's going to be tax hikes and there's going to be whatever government spending that's going to get cut, whatever it is that you want, there's going to be higher interest rates, lower interest rates. Whatever it is you think that's going to play out, you can then run that qualitatively, see what the impact will be. Or heck, if you don't even care about the markets and you just want to know, look at this in just a second, let's say we did cap profits. Let's say we did cap markups in high inflationary environments. What is the effect of that? You can find out what the effect is, and then going all the way back to just positioning your portfolio and understanding the dynamics, you can then know, okay, if we do X, Y, Z, this will lead to higher growth. This will lead to maybe a delay in the credit cycle in terms of private debt taking off. And what you then do is you correlate those sort of outcomes, higher debt acceleration, the beginning of the business cycle, that sort of stuff with, all right, should I be positioned value? Should I be positioned growth? Should I be positioned commodities? Being that, yeah, we've seen this phase state or similar phase state before in terms of the various dynamics at play. How does the next 6 months play out? And that's the general idea in terms of how to kind of apply this amongst the other tools that we have available.
I mean, this would really be a cat among the pigeons if it was taken up and used. Because think about it, like as Tony's got in the comments there, it's a pseudoscience at the moment. The economists that were talking at the end of 2022 and saying everything's going to turn to custard really shortly, there's no consequences for them being wrong. But you guys are right, and and it was measurable, and it can be done again. And I think that's the thing that's baking my noodle, is that what the implications of this.
It's also they've got the receipts. So you, as Mike asked, have you got a trading system attached to this, and what's been happening?
Exactly. Yeah, the receipts are there, 100%.
I just want to answer Dave. It's both, but more in the center. So it interacts. If I'm understanding. You're asking, is this macroeconomy focused on a nation and interacts with the foreign sector? That's the way it does, but it's very dynamic. So there's interplay between the foreign sector of the model, which is less dynamic and not as big because it was outside of the scope. So it's constrained a lot more, but they do both interact, and it affects the foreign exchange rate, which affects the capital account, and your capital account is money that generally is returned to you after you've would export or import from other countries, that your currency is laying around the international markets, and it goes back into your economy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the degree. It's both, but more centered. I hope that answers David's question. He was on the show last year. Great guy, true classical Keynesian. So good to see you, buddy.
Do you mind if I'm going to put in a plug here just quickly? I've got Business Film Booth. I wonder who they are. That's me. Business Film Booth, or BFB, creates uncorporate video that increases your lead conversion rate. Getting leads is expensive. Not converting them into meetings and sales is even more expensive. So I help businesses transform the space between their marketing and a sale. So starting on our system is free, except for some equipment. All you need is a face. So that's pretty much what I do. While I'm here, I'll put a plug in for planksip.org. As a philosophy and culture media outlet, Planksip helps emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. So where should we go next, Ty and Douglas? What do you think?
Let me jump in here. I hate to do this live. I'm going to put Ty in on the spot live, and I didn't think about this in real time, but we weren't prepared to show this. But it just kind of intrigued me as I'm literally playing around with the model Ty. I'm going to bring back up the prior run. Whoops, wrong button. There we go. I mean, Ty, I pulled up. What I did is I pulled up nominal GDP. I was just curious to see what nominal GDP did. And actually, if you can pull back up the cameras, I'm curious. I kind of want to see expressions here, if that's possible. Because so I just pulled up nominal GDP, and what I found kind of fascinating about this is that, and this is still on the run, so this is still on the pandemic run, we increased government spending, we increased direct spending to households, and then in 2024, heading into 2023, so again, model time, not historic time. So we increased interest rates and then brought them back down. And what's kind of interesting is using nominal GDP is kind of what the best thing we have for kind of a growth measure that I could show that would relate to just forward growth. We obviously got the massive boom because of all the government spending that took place relative to the custom run. What's really interesting to me, though, is even after raising interest rates, so again, the dark blue line is with the higher interest rates, as opposed to had interest rates following the pandemic shock just stayed at zero the entire time, and we never got a massive stimulus. We ended up dropping off immediately during a zero interest rate environment, but higher interest rates, we actually continue down the line of nominal GDP growth going forward, and then eventually we fall off into the future as kind of the normal business cycle takes hold. So just kind of thinking through the dynamics itself, and actually this is one of the pieces we're going to build to this, and we're already seeing really good some really good reason to believe that this could work. Is we've been able to attach large language models to the dynamics of the system, ask the large language models, hey, can you understand the dynamics of the system? Explain to me why you think this is happening. And so far, everything we've done, these large language models have been like, yeah, this is exactly what you would expect. It can lay out the whole theory for you. So not in the not too distant future, a couple months, that can even be attached to this, and you don't have to call up Ty or Doug to get the explanation. AI can just do it. But I think I'm onto something, right? I mean, 0% interest rates, we dropped nominal GDP, and yet we still continued with higher interest rates. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ty.
Well, I'd have to really, we both know that this model is so large and complex. There's probably a number of dominant feedback loops at play here. So yep. I could say, obviously, the policy rate has a dynamic effect. To what degree is that in the kind of dominant sense? It would be unknown, but it is interesting. It's just another interesting emergent property, behavior of the model we're seeing. And, Mike gets tickled by this stuff. I know he does, because he's a system dynamicist. When you run a model and you've got something in your head, your mental model, and you go and you press the play button and you see something that you didn't expect, that stuff's fascinating to me. I think Steve will agree too. And this is why we need to build structured models using, in my opinion, system dynamics is an agent-based modeling. If you're looking at smaller microsystems, that's a good tool as well. But you have to build a structure for your model that represents real world phenomenon you're seeing. Stocks are in our natural world all around us. We have stocks of everything. We have flows of everything that are going in and out of stocks. We have auxiliary variables that we can match to real world phenomenon. So there is a structure to be built when you build a system dynamic model. And if you achieve that, and it's to the degree of some realism to the real world, you press the play button and you see these emergent behaviors. To me, it's something amazing to watch, right? And it provides insights that we are not getting from traditional economics. We're not getting it. We're not going to ever get it from, neoclassical economics.
So if I may, let me weigh in on this. The way I like to think about what level of modeling acumen a student has is a beginner knows the basics, can open the software and successfully run somebody else's model. An intermediate level modeler can build an original model, but it is not counterintuitive or insightful. In other words, they know if I make this bigger, this parameter bigger, this thing will grow faster. If I make it smaller, it'll grow slower. Well, do you really need a model to know that? It doesn't really tell you anything. The expert level modeler builds a model, they've built it, and when they run it, they're not entirely sure what the hell is going to happen. The machine has to reveal it. And that's really the point, because if you always knew what was going to happen, there would be no need to run the model or to have simulation, right? So then you get into, okay, now I'm learning from the modeling. That's the point, right? To learn, get insights and what have you. But with a very large scale feedback-rich complex systems model, deciphering what has happened is often very tricky. I've had many consulting engagements where I'll come in to the client and I'll say, hey, let me show you 11 really interesting runs I've come up with. And I go through them all. And then somebody raises their hand and says, try this. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. I haven't tried that one. And you do it and they go, oh, why did that happen? And you're like, hamina. You don't know. So we now are working on tools and have tools that we didn't have in the past, like loops that matter, that allow us to diagnose, which feedback loops were dominant when, and from a feedback perspective, explain why something happened, and delve into what's the point of that, or why does that matter. And there are people working on using AI to assist us that as well, and that's super important, because if you don't have that, you get into, oh, look at the pretty curves, but there's no insight, there's no learning, and people go, well, cool, but it's an academic exercise, and let's move on.
Yeah, and people are just talking about the models and whether they're right, and there's no consequences again. But there's a question there from Danger Zone. Warren Buffett's now largely in cash. Do you use that as an input in your models, do you think, guys? Is that relevant? Is that something you come across or thought about?
Yeah, I know Warren Buffett's been raising a lot of cash recently. I mean, there's been a lot of concern during the entire 2023, 2024 rally that we've had that that we were, in a crash has been inevitable. And I know, I'll turn off my sharing there. I know that, it's kind of ratcheting it up, but I don't know his thinking process. If he thinks that's, a lot of people are taking that as an indication that, markets are about to crash. That sort of thing. I still think we're in a kind of longer term bullish market. Obviously, at any given moment on the short run, anything can happen. And maybe he thinks a specific sector is going to be more attractive, and maybe that's why he's raising cash. I'll be honest, I invest in a very different way than Warren Buffett does. And he's more of a value individual stock guy. I'm more of a macro guy. So I try and stick with the tools that I have and the things that I know, as opposed to really listen to anyone else, because I trust the tools that I have, and I get what people are saying about Warren Buffett. But he's not now. He's, as far as I'm aware, and Danger Zone, maybe you can come out and explain this if he said this, but I don't think Buffett's saying, oh yeah, 2008 is right around the corner all over again. I think all he's doing is saying he sold a lot of Apple, sold a lot of cash, or raised a lot of cash for probably opportunities that he sees down the future.
So a couple of comments from my seat here. One thing, after having done all this stuff, both the system dynamics, the macro money, MMT stuff, as well as trading systems and what have you, and working at the Chicago Board of Trading, giving talks at the New York Stock Exchange, for whatever that's worth, the first thing you're going to hear out of somebody's mouth who knows anything about this is, can you beat the S&P 500? Can you beat an index fund? That's what Buffett says. For the average investor, put your money in an index fund for the market and go play ping pong. And don't worry about it, because it's very hard to beat the market. You can beat it here, there, and whatever, but to consistently beat the market is tough. So that's the first thing you're going to hear from somebody, it seems to me, who's at all knowledgeable. Prove to me that you can, beat an index fund, right? So I got some other thoughts, but let me just leave it there for the moment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Two, any friends, family that ever comes to me for advice, my advice to them is buy the S&P and go play ping pong. I have no disagreement with that. You have to.
Ping pong is important.
Yes, yeah. For what it's worth, too, my own strategy. I
won't talk about Australian breakdancing, but that's another thing. Ray gun. Sorry, I had to throw that in at some point.
That was a low blow.
I think that was some great dance.
Not taken for a Kiwi, that's for sure.
Fucking embarrassing. Fucking embarrassing.
So I just had to.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
Anyway.
Well done, Mike. Yeah, we're
never going to forget it, no matter how hard we try.
Nope, we're not. And we're gonna remember an Australian did that, not a Canadian.
Yeah.
Although on the flip side, there is a fantastic Australian anecdote called doing a Bradbury, which you would know about, Steve. You know about that? The ice skater.
Ice skater
that
who
is
was
absolutely brilliant. Like doing a Bradbury this is what I want to do in life.
Managed to get into the final because somebody else got disqualified in the round ahead of him, so he moved in. and he was way behind all the other racers who were the ones who were expected to win. And then they fell, and he skated past them and won. All of them.
Oh, the entire field fell over.
And
this is Aussie guy went through it from way behind, like a lap
he's
behind.
expected to come last, and he came first. And he's
Pure
a
brilliant.
great bloke too, which is rather helps. Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
And I agree entirely with Tony. It was an embarrassment to send that person. Just if there may be some some form of low-level corruption that she was actually selected.
Back to
Australia's
Douglas.
really good at low-level corruption. We should actually have a corruption gold medal. Okay, but that'd be a real contest. I'm afraid you guys would not get the gold.
Nepotism gold medal, definitely. Douglas or Ty, where should we go with this? I was hoping to find out if there's for you guys, and maybe I missed this, do you think that if this all works, this would be a retail only thing, or are you thinking this is also useful for governments to be sold as software packages to departments? Who do you see using this a lot in the future apart from the traders?
For what it's worth, I mean, my passion is markets and understanding markets, and I would say what Steve Keen has done with Ravel is already what government should be using. We offer nothing new to policymakers and in governments that Steve hasn't already been not only explaining in terms of just theory for 20 plus years now, but also in terms of the capacity to just do it in terms of Ravel. So that is still, I mean, if you're trying to, what we're doing here is creating a model that's very specific to what it is we're attempting to understand. Whereas, not that I don't care about policy, it's just not what I'm trying to absolutely, although you can understand policy, someone on that side of things is going to want to build a model that has the dynamics that are important for them in terms of the policy you want to implement and in terms of the outcome you ultimately want, which actually, when we get to our next demonstration is going to show why you want this sort of stuff, because a very popular policy prescription that was put forward as inflation was ravaging was the markup caps. And you're only going to understand, and Mike, as you were saying, as a non-expert system builder and just a beginner to intermediate builder, it was you build a thing based on the principles that you understand, and then you see emergent behavior. What we're going to show next is exactly that. I mean, it's going to be one thing after the next that you just can't believe that this was the emergent behavior that happened out of that. But in terms of policy, they should be downloading Ravel today, and if that's something you want to understand, that's already been there. Ty, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
You'd make sure. So it is patreon.com/Ravelation. Go there, check it out. Steve, say a plug for Ravel. Oh, we can't hear Steve. You're muted, buddy.
Looking for the unmute button.
There we
go. Ravel is a combination of basic system dynamics, but with a rather more mathematical orientation than most of the existing tools. So it's visual. You can do everything. Mostly you can do with system dynamics program, but we knew they were never going to be a big mover in terms of getting a market share. It's got Minsky, and the main thing about Minsky is the Godley tables, and the Godley tables let you model financial dynamics using double entry bookkeeping. So you don't make the complete stuff-ups about the monetary system that neoclassicals and Austrians make on a routine basis, where they confidently say things that defy the laws of accounting, which is the same as somebody who thinks they're a physicist confidently denying the second law of thermodynamics. I'm sorry, you're an idiot. That's all you need to say. You don't understand the constraints. So the Godley tables in Ravel enable you to handle the constraints. And the third thing, which you guys have yet to bring in here, but I'm looking forward to seeing if you do, is the data handling side of Ravel. And that's why we're going with as a commercial program, because so many people work with multidimensional data, by which I mean data you can't fit on an Excel spreadsheet, more than 2 dimensions. Okay? So many people work with it. If you're running a single shop somewhere and you're selling a single product, you might have sales by month. Okay, that's your 2 dimensions. But if you've got more than one product, the sales by month by product, if you got salespeople, sales by month by product by salesperson, et cetera, you're going to analyze that. It's a real struggle, and most programs that do it use what are called pivot tables. But pivot tables tend to be a very intimidating, non-user-friendly way of handling multidimensional data. So the Ravel, the heart of Ravel, is a multidimensional object which is easy to manipulate, easy to understand what you're doing, and you can get multiple slices from that data and combine it and do your analysis on a whole range of different 2 or 3 dimensional slices as you wish. So it's a way, it is an order of magnitude faster than doing the work with a spreadsheet, and the just in terms of selecting data. And the other thing on top of it is that Ravel, Minsky/Ravel uses flowchart equations, which are similar to normal system dynamics. We actually have flowchart variables on the canvas, so you're not seeing a box with wires going into it. You're seeing the actual variable, and that means that the equation capability we built into Minsky for doing mathematical models now exists in Ravel for doing analysis of data. And one formula, like for example, one of my little party tricks, is to show how I can derive GDP from the Bank of International Settlements database, which doesn't have GDP in it. And that's a 5-part equation that lets me derive debt in domestic currency by the debt to GDP ratio, put it through a percentage operating, you've got GDP in national currency. And that works for 46 countries and 355 quarters. And that's how many equations you would have to do, cell reference formulas in Excel, to do the same thing. So it's a far more powerful way of analyzing data, as well as a more powerful way of accessing and doing initial data investigation. And it's really expensive. It's going to break the bank. Nobody can afford it. It's $7 a month.
Well, that puts me out of the equation.
There you go.
So I have a couple of other things. So one question I have, Ty, what when you say time on the horizontal axis, is it quarters, months, years, or what have you? And other than just wanting to know out of curiosity, I think that it's much harder to beat the market, or a better way of saying it is have an edge, have a trading system, investing system that has an edge on a very short time frame. I think flash trading, scalping, day trading, I think Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch, they have armies of PhDs that are going to take your lunch money, that particularly in equities. So you really need to think about a longer time frame. So it's more of an investing system, perhaps, rather than a trading system. So if I'm guessing your model is at least in quarters or maybe months, but not a shorter time frame.
So I'll let Doug answer, the purpose of MMT, which is obviously it is a longer term investment strategy where I day trade in the morning. I don't use, my national model for day trading. I use, traditional technical techniques to trade, which is momentum moves essentially. But to answer your question, it's actually in years, and I'm using the RK4 solver, and I'm doing 0.02. So it solves very slowly. But what I wanted in this model is to see proper acceleration in variables. So it would solve very precisely. So we could introduce shocks and we would see very dynamic, clear behaviors like we saw with the pandemic model that I couldn't do for one with an Euler's first order solver. So that's the time frame. I use years. And because I have so many small increments within that year, you can look at a part and say that's a quarter, that's a half a year. I made the choice early on to sacrifice speed for accuracy in this model because I thought it's a complex system. The economy, I know Jay Forster had his national model that was never published, but really it's never gone anywhere. And I want this model to go somewhere, and I need it to solve accurately, not fast. And that's a dilemma that Doug and I are trying to solve in Python to get this to solve fast enough, because it's doing so many iterations per year, 50 of them a year. So I think
so the model is in annual terms. Yeah. And you're just trying to get rid of integration error when you solve it. That's fine. So
Mike, can I? Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought. I was going to jump in on the part of the initial question in terms of just kind of how to think strategically about investing, but ask your part.
Yeah. So in light of the fact that it's a longer term model, but you're solving it accurately with a Runge-Kutta method and all that, I get that. My sense is that the model is used to provide advice for clients on, let's say, sector rotation and asset allocation among the four asset classes.
Yep.
Over the trend of the cycle. The big money movers move, rivers of money among equities, fixed income, commodities, and currencies, and then within equities over the cycle among the sectors based on what the macro economy is doing, if that's, one way to do it. And I'm guessing that's what you're doing.
You're on the right track. Absolutely. Okay. A couple thoughts too, just to jump on the point that you were making. 100% agree. I don't trade short term. I mean, one, obviously I'm knee deep into development of various software, so it's hard for me to pay attention, tick by tick on the markets to begin with. But I think I've made a total of about 3 or 4 trades going back over the last 12 months that are significant in any way. I know I got very aggressive heading into the end in 2023 as things were looking very, very strong. I got into cash starting in July of this year as things started to look very toppy based on the various things that we have. I do utilize leverage. I mean, that's like the one thing that I think that, at least the way that I invest, I can apply the sort of exploits that I think that are there in terms of understanding what no one else understands, that this kind of approach understands. So I'm a very slow moving trader in that sense. And if I had kind of more time to think things through, and eventually what these tools are building out is exactly what you're saying, where, and again, going back to your original point, I really do think this is the best way to invest. The best way to invest if you're going to be active in any way is to start with just a buy and hold S&P. And if you want to make any move from there, try and listen to the Steve Keens of the world, listen to this stream, try and identify the points where we're going to be at a 2008 again. We're going to be at a 2000 again. We're going to be at a 2022 again. I mean, I think those things are easy to see in advance, mainly because of the lack of insight that so many people have. And you can tell that if you're going to make a move, make that move first, and then you can kind of layer on the moves. And we have a couple people on our team that are those PhD super intelligent people that have created the short-term tools, and I'm very convinced that they are smarter than me when it comes to understanding the sort of math necessary to understand instantaneous pricing of various options contracts and whatnot. And I certainly don't have the tool set, just me and in my office to create those things. But yeah, going to the longer term idea. So again, we have a handful of things in parallel that are working. One of the things that we've built up is a reinforcement learning model that can now take the output of this model and do exactly what you were saying, where it can understand the best way to position yourself over a basket of assets based on the macroeconomic data that can be generated, and allocate to whatever it is you want. If you want maximize returns, great, you can do that. If you want a specific Sharpe ratio targeting, if you want minimal volatility, whatever it is you want, the reinforcement learning model can take that and make that determination based on the model. The next step to get all this right, which is the tricky part, although I can tell you, based on some of the stuff, the very simplistic, only a handful of variables where we have a lot of the data that we can feed in, we've had tremendous success already using the deep learning models to kind of find the unknowns that we need to learn to understand to allow these things to predict in the future. And that is the next step. Once we have that, the reinforcement learning part is already there. It's just obviously feeding the correct or as correct as possible predictions into the future to understand where we're at in kind of that dimensional space of, all right, so you have inflation rising, you have unemployment rising. I mean, as you guys know, as any complex system traverses through through space and time, you never overlap with an identical system state, and so you have to understand where you're at in each moment. And of course, the machine learning can do this, and then say, yeah, given the simulation you've given me, I can create an optimal portfolio construction based on whatever the dynamics are that you think are going to happen over the next 6 months. So, yeah, really good questions. I mean, me and you are on the same wavelength in terms of, yeah, markets are very hard to beat, and our specific approach is, I think, with the market, our exploit, if you will, where people are playing the market wrong is specifically they've never listened to the Steve Keens of the world. They've never listened to the MMTers who understand what government spending is. They're too busy listening to the monetarists, and that's kind of the exploit that we think we have.
Okay.
So one other thought I had. Sorry, Steve, I don't want to talk over you. Did I?
You go ahead, man. I've got mine ready.
Okay, sorry. I think for this sort of approach, this is kind of what we're working on in our group down here is, we have a similar macro model, an MMT macro model called GOMPI in our group, but there's a lot of macro models in the world. system dynamics and otherwise. And so that's fine. And there's, I don't think in and of itself having a macro model it allows one to make a ton of money. But I do think, using it for investing is a twist on it, which is very good, like you guys are doing. One thing that we're thinking about and started investigating is industry level models and using the macro model to inform industry level models. So the one I'm working on, because I'm a woodworker, is the lumber industry and lumber pricing, which is very important. And that has all sorts of aspects to it that scream dynamic modeling, supply chain issues, Canadian forest fires. Sorry, I had to take my shot at Canada. The housing market, right, and interest rates. So there's a lot of macro stuff that goes on, and that impacts a particular industry, in this case, the lumber industry, and being able to say something about lumber prices and where, what's happening, it would be you'd get a lot of people, builders and, commodity experts and whatever to get involved in your website or your, as clients. And, there's a gazillion industries, right, that are similarly impacted, and, pick a few that are particularly macro sensitive, and obviously, again, you look at the sector rotation stuff, there are the cyclical sectors and the industries they're in, and the insensitive ones, and, find the ones that are macro sensitive and build models that talk to your macro model. And then I think in being able to say something intelligent about the industry, I think there's a lot of possibility to make some money there.
Mike, you are now going to get me distracted on a new project to try and tie in sectors. Now, Ty just had me focused on the prize at hand, and now you've got me intrigued. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. Ty, get building, man, get building.
No, so that's an ultimate dream, actually, is to start modeling all 13 sectors of a national economy, and drill down a little bit further. There's always a rabbit hole that we end up down down that hole where we're actually modeling every firm in the economy, and that's excessive. But my dream is really to have an integrated macro model, but with some more depth. And specifically, I'd like to see all 13. I think it's 13 sectors under the national account. I can't remember the number.
Yeah, and at the industry level, you start talking to or selling to industry groups, the National Association of Home Builders and stuff like that. And they have resources, and they have lots. They then sell to their membership your insights, right? So I just think that's trying to compete with economics.com or any of these, the Wharton Econometric, whatever they call it now, and so on. I think that's just really tough. But like I say, if you have a macro model, but you use it for these other purposes, investment advice or industry level insights and what have you, I think that there's a lot of opportunity there.
Imagine if there was actually one agreed model that you could use, like a science or something. That would be crazy. Steve, you were going to say something before.
I actually wanted to see the model. So I'm going to ask Ty if you can bring the model up on screen, the base Ravel model, so we can see it.
Yeah, I can. It's possible. It's just going to take me a second to bring up. Sure. Just so stand by. You guys can do the top chatters there. Somebody can do them for the second time. Probably Doug.
I think it has to be Douglas, doesn't it?
Oh, what's that? I'm breaking up. I'm breaking up a little. What's that? What's that?
Yeah. Nice.
All right, top chatters. The Skype converser, Bob Lior. Hold on, let me. I'm reading off my teleprompter. I'm just going to bring this to the big screen so I can see it all. All right, Rick O'Brien, Michael De Sousa Cruz, Hugh N, Dredge I, Web Freaks, Rob Pierce, Gavin Van, Economics in One Lesson, Tony Wilson, Amir, Bob Dones, Zero Shot, Herb Wiseman, Cybernetics, Political Economy 101, Danny T, our own Wall, Michael Newman, Joe Polito, Alex Marshall, Mano Heron, Jovian R, Nicholas Gomez, Angie Trader, Danger Zone, Algorithm, Thomas Darlington, Ken Crawford, Botched Mandela, Derek McDaniel, I don't, is that Laramir? Is that an L at the front? All right. Marcus Champ, Brian Hode, Igor Insonic, George Waters, Arleando, Jim Rogers, P. Craig William, Tom Thompson, Bill Goggin, Luis Sella, Orazucco, Carlitos, MMT, and Amir S.
Nice one. Thank you very much. Actually, I noticed after one of the recent episodes, there was someone that said, "Oh man, why do they do the top chatters thing?" And the pile-on from people going like, "What? I love making top chatters. How dare you?"
I remember
and just,
that.
everyone was like, "No way! Don't even think about taking that down." So it's still here. Don't worry.
Yeah, that was our first little gimmick that we've done on the show, was the top chatters, and we've tried so many other gimmicks since. They never hold, but the top chatters, that is an appreciation to all of the viewers that join us on Saturday, because what this is really at the end of the day, and we do guests and stuff like that, but it's really a couple guys and sometimes a gal in a pub sitting around talking about what they're passionate about. In this case, we like economics, right? So that's really what the show is. And then to have the added effect that people actually tune in and listen to us and join that conversation, that's extremely gratifying. And we don't make money off doing this Saturday mornings, but it's, it's our little get together and we get to share it with everybody. And that's our best way at showing the appreciation that you're joining in. So thank you very much for joining in. I got the model up, Steve. So I have to declare to everybody, this is not the most recent version, because we've kind of gone into a proprietary mode where there are equations I cannot show under agreement with my good friend Douglas. We just can't give that away at this point because we have plans ahead. However, I can show you a more beta version, and I will share my screen. Well, it's been a while since I've done this. Okay, and then Julia in the background, if you can get us all off, get that chat out of here, get those people that are on screen, get them out of there, get this full screen. Almost. There we go. That's the model. I will show basically, so this is an older version, but nonetheless, it does show some dynamics, and Steve's legacy is what I want to show. And so during the model build, and actually towards the end, I wanted to just have a really solid theory of production. And Steve has built on his YouTube channel and his Patreon the Goodwin model, and then extended it to include the financial instability hypothesis by basically including a function for investment. And basically it says, as firm profits go up, firms will invest more and more to the point they invest beyond their profits and they need to take out credit. Well, if you read his 1997 paper, which his doctoral thesis, which in itself is a book that should be published, there's a lot more at play, and he added a lot more variables and removed a lot of the constants. And constants in system dynamics are essentially the bounding of your model, the perimeter of your model. Well, if you want to answer more and more, you can change those constants into variables. So one of the things, and I don't know if Steve remembered me contacting him, is he had some functions for the capital utilization rate, and was something that I wanted to include in my model. But because there's no mainstream documentation on how to do that with system dynamics, I have to turn to my mentor, and I had to read his paper. So I have, the capital utilization is variable. Productivity is variable in this model. There's no constant assumption. So what you're seeing on screen was my best effort at modeling what he had in his 1997 doctoral thesis, albeit I had to connect all the other modules. And Steve might notice himself, if you look at firm profits, I actually have the rest of the model connected there. Whereas in the simple Goodwin model, we just assume that all output is consumed. So you can just take Y subscript R and minus any firm expenses and you have profits. This model, it's obviously far more detailed, where I'm reliant on, okay, people actually consume, like, so final goods have to be consumed for there to be profits, as opposed to it just sitting in as inventory before it's sold. So this is kind of my geeky part of the model, where I was just really proud because I feel like there is a piece of Steve's DNA in this model. And you can't remove this module. It's so critical a theory of production, the underlying model. And it's at a point where this national model is so complex that we are now building out the quantitative version. So we are literally taking the national accounts for the United States, and we're using all those initial conditions. We are adjusting all of the functions in the model. So the shape, and when I say shape, let's say the wage change function is an exponential. Well, there's a real shape in the real world that we can define. And it takes a lot of work and statistical analysis, and we are getting there. But the basis of this model, because it's so complex, it's at a point where we can take it from just, let's look at the reference modes. Oh, as Mike would say, these are nice squiggly lines. Okay, that's great. And it gives you some insights because there's emergent behavior you didn't expect. But what's the next level in this? And that's actually competing with DSGE models. So we're actually going to have a dynamic system, integrate it with deep learning. So that's kind of more proprietary stuff. That's actually going to be predictive. And if we can get it to that level, which I believe we will, it really kind of puts to bed the traditional versions of macroeconomic modeling and forecasting. Silence.
I wonder if people
silence the critics,
like those that, like, for me, and I'm an outsider. I know this stuff peripherally, not deep in it at all, like you guys. And to me, the implications of what you guys are doing is enormous, incredible. And yeah, exactly. So maybe I hope it's stunned silence, but that's what I see. Or am I reading too much into it? Steve, what do you think? Do you see what I mean?
Oh, no, this is a very sophisticated extension of what I did in my PhD, as Ty said. So my basic model had, I took the Goodwin model, which had cycles generated by employment and wages share of GDP, which basically gives you economic activity and income distribution. And then I added in firms borrowing money when they want to invest more than profit. So that's what brought it to a three-dimensional model. And what happened out of that was quite remarkable. I still remember the first time I saw it. This is an emergent property, because what I expected was to see a process leading to a debt deflation. That's what I was trying to model. What it actually did was, first of all, generate diminishing cycles and then rising cycles. And it was quite surprised. In fact, when I plotted, I used hyperbolic functions at that stage in my, I was using exactly what Blatt had used in dynamic economic systems. So I'd use his hyperbolic equation. I'll move this back over to the other screen now. And that gave you very, very sharp dynamics fundamentally. But what I got out of it was like a tornado. You start at the bottom, go at the top, and bang, you come out the other, or a whirlpool through an hourglass, but going up and then being thrown off into a breakdown of the system. And I remember showing it to one of my lovely, really, really lovely econometric lecturers, Eric Soe. And he took one look at it and said, Steve, if you've identified something that actually exists in the real economy, we're in deep, deep trouble. That was 1992 that I did that. And, it took a while to get the thing published. So that is what happened, the great moderation. So the neoclassical started wetting themselves. Oh, look at what our excellent modeling, our excellent current economy has led to diminishing inflation, diminishing cycles. Isn't that great? I was going, holy hell, this is my complex systems warning of a breakdown in the not too distant future. So that's where I had, but I didn't have, I had capacity utilization, but again, using a sigmoid to mock that to some extent, because as well as capital, you have the amount of capital you actually utilize, and that's always less than 100%. These days down about the 70% mark. To have dynamics of that feeding in, and what Ty's done is bring the whole lot together in a fashion that I doubt that I could have integrated it that well myself. I really do. Okay? So it's remarkable.
I think it's the accessibility that I'm seeing, and Douglas and Ty, you were talking also about handing this over to large language models. So even complete munters like me might be able to ask some simple questions of a really dynamic model and get an answer that's in natural language, that's going to be really something else. So yeah, I know it's not for that purpose per se, but I just think making this stuff accessible to more people and making economics more accessible has got to be a good thing, right?
Yeah, and so that's you know, one of the things that I beg Doug for is let's have something that caters to the education of economics. And due to server costs, it's not going to be a very advanced version, but he catered to that desire of mine, which I thank him. So it will be accessible in that fashion if people are just curious. The layman, we'll call them. Although I think normal people are generally smarter than economists. I'm just going to be honest. In this process,
they're not smart. No, they're not smarter, Ty. They just simply haven't had a frontal lobotomy by doing an economics degree.
Yeah, as I've always said, I don't have the disadvantage of being an economist. It's brilliant.
Exactly, right? So, but to put it that way, yeah, we do. There will be that option for the layman to just go out and test out you know, some, you know, how the economy works dynamically. And if they decide, you know, they want to think about their retirement, they can go to Applied MMT and learn some really good investing skills and use some pretty cool tools that we haven't covered today, that Doug often posts on his Twitter, that are receipts that kind of prove it's right. So
we're wrapping things up, but I just wanted to pick up on something that Tony asked there about these. Is there any energy included in your systems yet? Does that feature? That seems to be a big thing.
No. So I'm taking the lead actually on Steve's work. I know he's got some projects on the side going, and I'm waiting to see some initial results with that. I know there's going to be some dynamic modeling. And so instead of inventing the wheel during this model build, it was more, okay, I've got all the pieces in the box, time to put it together so we have something large and dynamic and robust that can answer a lot of questions. But one of the things I left out that was in an early version of the model was energy. If I am going to add something like that to the national model, I want it worked on. I want to see a paper. And I think Steve's going down that road with a few other individuals. And when that sort of academic material comes out, then I can open up that box and say, holy, as Steve would say, fuck a duck. This has got to go in the national model. But I want to stay true to academic research. I just don't want to put willy-nilly stuff in a model. I want there to be some backed up research done on it, some work, and then it will get there eventually.
There is one way. There is one way which it already is in the model, and that's the Leonti of a capital output ratio, which, working with Matthias Grasselli and Tim Garrett, I show that is actually the inverse of the efficiency with which machines turn energy into useful work. So it's fundamentally the second law of thermodynamics turning up there. Now, what you get as a result of that is you get, obviously, if you link that up to an energy supply data, then you could have depletion of energy. And if you then link it to pollution, you could have pollution damaging the productive system. And those are both fairly obvious in one sense of further progressions of the model. And given like an empirical data, this is what, as usual, when I look at the empirical data around a theory that I have which contradicts the mainstream, I end up looking at something. I say, if I was making up numbers to make my own case, I wouldn't dare use numbers that I get from the statistical agencies. So the correlation of change in energy with correlation of GDP and energy between 1960 and 2017 is 0.997. Now that's because you've got a rising trend of both. But the correlation of change in energy and change in GDP is 0.83. And it's so high, and they're exactly the same magnitude. 6% change in energy, 6% change in GDP. So it's saying to a first approximation, GDP is energy. And you could take that into an energy and exergy, and you could take that into account in the model right now.
So if just a couple of points. One is if you want guidance on how to go about building a macro model that explicitly integrates the energy sector and looks at the energy transition, look at John Sturman's 1981 MIT doctoral dissertation. It's beautifully documented, beautifully written. You'll disagree with some of the stuff John has in there, but he uses a lot of Cobb-Douglas production functions and SMAC production functions. But the overall approach he took, I think you'd find super helpful. And on this issue of the economics profession and, what economists are typically doing, whatever. I've said it many times on this show. I'll say it again. Jay Forrester always asks me, why the hell are you writing for other economists? They don't care about the economy. They care about publishing economics papers. Write instead for the business community, the educated citizen, the political folks, and what have you. They'll value what you're saying, and they won't have the baggage, the lobotomy, whatever you want to call it, of being trained as a traditional economist. And I fully agree with that, with this caveat. I'll tell you a quick story. Some years ago, Jerry Barney, a physicist who worked for Jimmy Carter, got out of office, Reagan took over, started a firm called the Millennium Institute. And he and his staff built a large-scale macro model called Threshold 21, the T21 model. And they were getting it in at World Bank and in countries all over the world, and they're doing a great job. And his old boss, Jimmy Carter, wondered if he should use the T21 model at the Carter Presidential Library. And so Jerry Barney and Jimmy Carter had a this and that back and forth. And Carter said, all right, I will adopt your model if my chief economist says it's okay. So a traditionally trained economist and some staff were dispatched to Washington. And Jerry calls me up and says, Mike, I need help. I got a real economist coming here. So I went down, and we had like a 2 or 3 day, I can't remember, back and forth. In the end, Carter adopted the model, but you got to be able to stand in the batter's box with real economists under certain circumstances. You can't just go around them. So the econ has to be tight. Even if it's heterodox econ, it's got to be tight. You just can't say I willy-nilly, as Ty kind of said, put this relationship in there. It's got to be in the literature and taught somewhere, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's actually what I've done with my recent modeling, because about a year or two ago, there must have been, I realized that Goodwin's model could be derived directly from economic definitions. Very, very simply. They take the wages share of GDP, which is wages divided by GDP, and the employment rate, which is the number of people with a job divided by population, put in some basic, correct structural equations and assumptions, and you get Goodwin's growth cycle. You add debt, you get my Minsky model. You add government spending, somebody's typing on the keyboard there. You add government spending, and you get basically a dynamic complex distance version of MMT. So working directly from definitions is rather hard to dispute. And that's what I'm working on these days, saying we start from definitions and therefore we get our models. It isn't a case of arbitrary, as they like to say, ad hoc assumptions. This is literally, you take the economy, you put it together structurally, you get our theories, not yours.
Yeah, that's actually one of the arguments I often use. If we want it, we're never going to have fundamental constants in economic theory, but we can have fundamental macro definitions, as I like to call it, i.e. the employment ratio. You cannot argue with that. You have a population of workers and you have a population that's employed, and that ratio is true no matter how you say it. And if you can define that as part of your model, you're halfway there to using, real definitions that you can't argue with. So it's something I took from Steve, and I've always argued myself. If you want some plausibility in your models, use real definitions that nobody can argue with, even if they're just very basic at the start. And then when you start accumulating those different definitions together and you model it, now you've got a full macro definition that you can't argue with, right? And it's up to you, of course, to adjust the parameters to add realism afterwards. But yeah, something I strongly agree with Steve.
I noticed Dark Matter in the chat box just asked if there's a Patreon for Steve, and there is. It's patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen, where most of the posts are free and access has no paywall. But Steve, can you also get access to Ravel from there, or should they go somewhere else?
No, Ravel we've got a separate Patreon page for Ravel, and we're not sure how long we're going to maintain the Patreon page. We might take other marketing forms. If it goes viral, which is what I hope would happen, then we'd stick with it. We might have to change to something other, because we want it to be sold and used, obviously. But there's a page which is patreon.com/Ravelation. So not R-E, but R-A, Ravelation. And and that's the where you go to buy it. There's free subscription. The Patreon has free. But with that, you just get the discussions that the post we put up. To get Ravel, get Minsky, the Minsky minus the Ravel data handling, that's $1 a month, and to get Ravel, that's $7 a month.
Very good. Now, go on.
I just saw Tony's question. How do you model production without energy? And it's a valid question. But what Steve was kind of saying is the Lefton function and kind of implies that it's just not implicitly modeled with the capital output ratio. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I just for Tony, I want to see, and I know Steve's working on it. I'm going to wait for some of the results he does. Kerry King, I think, is mixed in there. Once I see those results, I'm going to poach their work and employ it in my national model. Like, if Tony, it's good work.
Just to Tony, we do include energy implicitly because that's the capital output ratio. Okay, but when you do the mathematical modeling of the Cobb-Douglas production function or the Leontief function, I find that I replace. Let's go back a bit. To get energy into production systems, you have to say it's not capital and labor that produce output. It's capital that has energy pumped into it and labor that's consumed food that produce output. So you replace the simple K and L with K for the number of machines, number inverted commas, and L for the number of workers. E, L, and EK for the amount of energy they consume. And we consume tens of thousands of watts these days, but we only put a small amount of that into production. And then you have EK and little L, and they are the efficiency with which the energy that's consumed is turned into useful work. Now, when you look at humans, the most we can actually put out is about 100 watts sustained. You have to be bloody healthy to put out 100 watts of power to do any manual process whatsoever. So that's the maximum. That's a constant. And then what you get is so that's the labor content. But machinery, there's a maximum efficiency again, which is given effectively by the laws of thermodynamics and the efficiency of manufacturing processes. Definitely less than half of the energy input is converted into useful work. But that ratio is then what gives you the relationship between capital and output in the model itself, taking the place of the capital output ratio. And the reason we've had growing output over time is growing energy consumption of machines. So my favorite example is to compare James Watt's steam engine, which in its early incarnation could eat about 20 tons of coal a day, to Elon Musk's Falcon 9 and Starlink that consume 60 million times as much over a time period. And that's where our growth in income has come from, the increase in energy.
Yeah, I think adding energy explicitly to a macro model like you're proposing, an interesting thing to look at would be the impact of AI and data science and its need for electricity and robotics going forward, and its impact on the economy, let alone growing cannabis and smelting aluminum. I think electricity is really the demand for electricity at the macro level is going to be ever increasing. And the capacity, if we're going green, is going to be struggling to keep up. And I think that'd be an interesting one thing to look at with a macro model that has energy explicitly included.
As we're wrapping things up, Douglas, can I get? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, just to close up that final thought is it's going to be great. We can model energy, but then there's the other part of it. If we're actually modeling, what is the effect of too much energy use? So we're going into the limits of growth, and that's another reason I left out energy from my model, because I didn't want to have to sit and look like Nordhaus and create fake damage functions. It's going to lower GDP 10 degrees. Warming is only going to lower GDP over the next 100 years by 0.8% or some bullshit like that. So there's that aspect of the research too, which I think is very inconclusive, is what is the real world effects of, a planet warming because of energy use. And so that's another reason why I've steered away from it, because I'm a systems thinker. If you're going to add something to the model, it's got to be useful to the totality of the dynamics. If it's not part of a feedback loop, get it the fuck out of there. So it's not that I discount modeling energy. I just need to have a holistic understanding of it. And again, that's why I'm deferring to smarter people than me, which are Steve and Mike, and Dave's smarter than me, Doug's smarter than me, Tony's smarter than me, Michael D'Souza Cruz, he's smarter than me.
Sure
so I'm waiting for these people to figure it out.
Douglas, tell us where
we're all smarter than each other.
If they want to do,
we're all above average.
And Messi is not ready for prime time, or it is. I'm not sure. But what people could do next if they're interested, or should they just go on Applied MMT website? What's next?
Yeah, so you know, if you're an active trader, active investor, you're interested in the stuff we're doing, appliedmmt.com, you can find that there. If you're just interested just to follow, you know, what I'm doing, what Ty and I are doing, just look up Applied MMT on YouTube. You'll see this face, a little more hair in the thumbnail, but the little avatar must be 5 years old. But Applied MMT on YouTube, Applied MMT. I'm at MMT Macro Trader on Twitter. Not with the underscore. That guy is scamming people. Don't talk to him, impersonating me. Just Applied MMT Macro Trader. But yeah. Ty and I have a live stream every Monday. One of the things I wanted to show was the impact of the long stream impact of markup caps would do on today's stream. I know we're running out of time, so tune in Monday to the Applied MMT live stream, and we will definitely demonstrate that. And I'd love to get back on in 6 months or whatever, and have your guys' takes. Ty and I were just so amazed at the outcome of all of that. So yeah, we'll demonstrate that soon on our live stream. But yeah, Applied MMT, search that. You'll find everything you need if you're interested in following what we're doing.
Thank you to all our chatters for being here. Thank you, Douglas from Applied MMT. Welcome back, Ty. Till next time, take care, be nice, look after yourself, brush your teeth, visit your mum, and practice a random act of generosity, because that really messes with the system. We'll see you next time. Take care for now.
Yep.